Hello and welcome to part 2. I didn't realize the first video was going to run so long, so I just sort of had to break it up to, I think, what will probably be 2 or 3 parts. And so with that in mind, let's get to the knowledge.
Oh, yeah! You gotta get swifty! You gotta get swifty in here! It's time to get swifty!
This video is brought to you by CyberGameway, with an emphasis on exposing streamers of all types, as well as exploring business relationships with partnered websites and service providers. CyberGameway is the place you want to be for streaming gamers who want that sub bump. To apply for membership or sponsorship, head over to cybergameway.com. Now we're going to talk about some abbreviations and words that aren't parts of your computer, but directly improve your gaming experience. The first one we're going to talk about is called Vsync, or virtual sync. Pretty simple. Vsync is something you can use in your game settings that will lock your computer's frame rate to your monitor's frame rate. If you've got a monitor with a 70 hertz refresh rate, your computer will synchronize with the monitor. Some monitors can be overclocked. That's very cool. If you've got a mid-level computer, you might want to keep Vsync on, because if you turn it off, you might get a higher frame rate. On the other hand, you will get what are called artifacts. And this is basically like shadows in your movement if you're like running around and stuff. You'll have kind of these weird shadowy effects. If, however, you do have a much better computer that doesn't need to lock itself to the monitor's refresh rate, you can go ahead and turn that on, because you will get a much smoother performance and you won't get any of the artifacts that come with it. Anti-aliasing. If you're playing an 8-year-old game like Mass Effect 3, you're going to notice some of those pixels don't look as smooth as you would like. This is called aliasing. You're going to have some jagged edges if you're playing a lower resolution game on a higher resolution system. Anti-aliasing turns this off. What it does is it fills in the gaps between those pixels and sort of smooths it out. If your game does have this ability to turn anti-aliasing on and off, you might want to play around with it, because while you might get a smoother experience with anti-aliasing, you might experience a drop in frame rate. You can, however, work around this with increasing your game's resolution. Do with that what you will. BIOS. Binary Operating System. It's your computer's ignition switch. It's what starts all the core functions of your computer before it boots to Windows, or if you're an idiot, Mac OS. You can access the BIOS by pressing F2 or delete really early in your computer's boot system. And if you do access the BIOS, you'll see all the different things that your computer is currently controlling. And you can, if you have the kind of system that allows it, like a Asus Z270 motherboard, you can go in there and change a few things. On an Asus 270, you can overclock your system up to 18%, which turns up the refresh rate on your CPU, turns up the refresh rate on your RAM, and it basically speeds up all the core functions of your motherboard, allowing you a better performance. It does, however, generate more heat, and we already talked about that. So the BIOS controls all the core functions, and it also allows you to modify what is called the XMP, Extreme Memory Profile. The XMP is your RAM's ability to speed up or slow down. Now you can adjust your computer to different profile settings based on what you're doing. If you want to play games, you turn that motherfucker up. Here's one thing that a lot of people don't really realize right away, if you're kind of a new computer builder. When you install your RAM automatically defaults to 2133 megahertz, even if you're running 3200 megahertz. So you're going to immediately want to adjust that to run at spec. The reason it does this is because it just has a default setting. It doesn't want to read something wrong and screw up. If you're playing with Chinese parts, like something you got off Wish, it can easily do that. So the computer automatically defaults to 2133. So if you have anything above that, go ahead into your BIOS, adjust the XMP profile to the spec that it's supposed to run at. It's pretty simple. It might seem like it's not, but it is. All you gotta do is go into the settings and tweak that motherfucker. This will allow your computer to do more faster. It's like putting turbo on. VRM, Voltage Regulator Module. This is an integral part of your computer system, and it's kind of the unsung hero, because when you have a really good motherboard with a astonishingly responsive VRM, your computer has the ability to run much faster than its initial spec. What your VRM does is it regulates the voltage going to the CPU. Now, if you've got a motherboard with a significant VRM, it can handle the amount of heat that's going to be generated when you overclock your CPU. Because VRMs are made up of 3 different things: your MOSFET, your choke, and your capacitor. The MOSFET is the part of your computer that actually delivers the power to the CPU. It gets this power from what's called the choke. The choke is basically the power conditioner of the motherboard. If you know what a power conditioner, it just makes sure that there's no, give and take with the voltage. It's making it a constant steady stream coming from the capacitor. The capacitor is kind of like a battery. It stores electricity for short periods of time and delivers it to the choke, which goes then to the MOSFET, which goes then to the CPU. What it also does, and this is very important, it prevents, or at least it fights, power surges. Power surges are very, very bad. And if your capacitor blows, you have a big problem. So if you want to overclock your CPU, you better have a VRM that allows that kind of thing. Because if you fry a cap, you're fucked. Here's one that you do need to know. TDP, which is thermal design power. Your processor's TDP spec is the rating at which it measures the heat that's put out over time. It's measured in watts, but not the electricity. The watts generate heat. So your processor's TDP is the spec at which it can handle a certain amount of heat. If you're overclocking your CPU, you're naturally going to generate more heat. So your thermal design power is the spec at which you can overclock, and your computer is not going to slow it down. If you generate this amount, X amount of heat, your computer is going to do what's called throttling, which means it's going to slow all the processes down, and it will basically bring it down so that it's like traction control in your car. If you start to slip, it's going to slow your car down, and this is just a safety feature because your computer doesn't want you frying your parts. So if you're generating too much heat, if you're going beyond your TDP, your computer is going to throttle down to be able to handle that kind of heat. And it'll cool down, and it'll speed back up, and then it'll cool back down again. So the better your processor, the more TDP it's going to have. On the other hand, certain processors like the 9900K or anything AMD's ever put out are going to generate more heat. They can, however, handle this. So don't get too worried or too bogged down in the details, because the better processor is going to be able to handle that amount of heat. PCIe. This stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect Express. It's those little slots on the motherboard that you can plug your graphics card into, you can plug your Ethernet adapter, you can plug your USB cards, you can, like sound cards, video capture cards, those all plug into your PCI slots. Now we've got Gen 4, which is, slowly starting to come out, but generally these days, if you're getting a motherboard, you might not be getting Gen 4 just yet, because it's, for the newer stuff. What this means is it runs at a different speed, and it runs at a different set of protocols. That's pretty much it. Gen 3, Gen 4, they can both handle the same stuff. They're just going to handle it in a different way. Core. Put simply, this is your processor's processor. These days, processors have many cores. It didn't used to be like that, and it wasn't even that long ago. Quad cores are a thing of the past only in the last couple of years. These days, you've got Ryzen CPUs, you've got the Intel 9900X, which have many cores. You have the AMD Threadripper, which has 64. What this means is you'll be able to handle much more tasks under load, and it won't really be a huge burden to your computer. That's a good thing. However, if you're getting something like a Threadripper, gaming is a little bit of an overkill. So think about that. Also, Threadrippers and the 9900X are super expensive. You're going to get serious performance, but you might be paying for something you don't need. So think about that. So that is what you need to know. There's a whole lot of other words and abbreviations that you can learn about, but are not necessarily integral to the process of building a computer, and they won't necessarily affect your gaming experience if you don't know about it. What I wanted to do is give you a primer to the stuff that you will need in order to build a computer that you want, and you want a computer that's going to do what you want it to do. Computer companies these days want your money. With esports being a billion-dollar industry, they want your money, and so therefore it is in their best interest to make it as easy as possible for you to get into it. And it's a great time to get into it. These days, most parts are plug and play. Really simple. Your processors go in a certain way, and they're going to tell you how it goes in. Your hard drives, your SSDs, your NVMEs are all going to tell you what you need to know in order to work with it. So do your best to learn about this stuff and build a computer that is right for you. Don't go overkill if you're playing a game that doesn't need it. On the other hand, if you are playing a game that does need it and you kind of shirk on the money, don't worry, because you'll still be able to play that game. You might not be able to play it on ultra setting, but you will still be able to enjoy your gaming experience because you have built a computer that works. You don't need it to be anything more than it is. You just need to enjoy it. I'm Hobbs. I'm out. If you've got a mid-level computer, you might want to go ahead and keep Vsync off, because if you're running it, what was I gonna do? Because it's proprietary technology and that's not going in.